So we are going to just kick it off with a quick poll for everyone. Um, I want you to think about how the words data equity make you feel. As US-based researchers, we feel we have very complicated feelings around this topic at this moment. So be what they will. Are you feeling very Pooh Bear, very Tigger, very Piglet, very Eeyore? So how do you feel right now? I will say, being on this call and hearing about the registrants, I'm feeling very Tigger. So, all right, and you can feel free to drop into the chat.
Or even annotating the screen. That's so fun.
Leave it to a bunch of data people to be like, no, I'm going to add to this particular visualization. Oh, because just the dichotomies of these aren't enough. Love it. All right. So very complicated emotions for all of us, probably waxes and wanes, but I know all of us are very excited about the vision of data equity, right? Or we wouldn't be here today. Um, all right. So with that, let's kick off a little bit into the, oh, we're gonna have to clear the screen somehow. We're gonna kick off into our kind of run of show for the day. So we're gonna go into I'm going to do a quick introduction on kind of what we are at AISP, how we're situated, and the toolkit that we'll be talking a lot about today. Then we're going to go into what we call our four-question framework, and we're going to do some interactive discussions. Um, and then we'll close it out with a discussion of data governance, which is my answer to everything is like, it's probably data governance that you need. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. And I want to say shout out to the person who figured out how to make those annotations go away. I'm not sure who that was, but that's great because that'll make our slides a lot more enjoyable for everyone. All right. So with that, let's kick off. Next, here's another question for you. I don't always make the assumption that everyone is as data obsessed and data equity obsessed as we are. So think about where you are in here, right? Are you obsessed? Are you invested? Are you learning? Are you becoming aware? And you don't have to respond to this unless you feel compelled to. But just think about this because we're all entering into the space with a different level of understanding and content knowledge. And so wherever you are, this presentation should still work for you. This is meant to be adaptable to a wide audience. We also want to say that we make all of our content available to everyone. And so we hope that you will reuse our content. We love attribution, but this content is for you. And so we will make these slides available to you and hope that you will, if you are becoming aware and learning right now, and you want to help other people do the same, we encourage you to reuse our materials. That is why we make them. All right, so we're going to jump in to our first, or no, we're not. We're
Do you
going
want
to
to
do,
do the poll? We can do the
uh,
poll.
it's up to you.
Okay. Yes. If you feel
I really,
compelled to
yeah.
share with us, we use this thing called WooClap. It's like a Mentimeter if you've ever done that. Oop. And
Mainly, I just like saying woo clap is what
so
Isabel's saying. So, because it is the best name of an interactive poll option. So, woo clap, brilliant. So here we go. There we go. So which word best describes you? Perfect. All right, so we have a really good mix in here. We expect the obsessed to show up to places like this. And love that there's a lot of folks who categorize themselves in the learning category. I will also say that sometimes people say they're learning and other people say they're obsessed. So sometimes you might need to ask someone else how they view you. All right. That is Woo Clap. We will have another one of those, not to worry. Okay, so now a quick introduction to us. So we have a niche in this space. We are singularly focused on state and local governments. We do not work at the federal level. And might I say thank you for that at this moment in US history. So we are state and local focused, and we are singularly focused on 1 thing. And Isabel, can you click through to two slides? So we are singularly focused on ethical use of data. And in our context, which I know everyone's context is really different, we explicitly focus on racial equity. I do want to say that everyone's context is different. For some folks, that is not as much of an emphasis. With our history, it is. We've been told that it's more helpful to think about this broadly across all lines of equity, and the content works the same, right? So please use this as you need to. So we work around ethical use of data. We do a lot of work around guidance and standards. That's a toolkit that we're going to share with you today. We do a lot of training and consultation, a lot of presentations. We do a lot of research. But the core of our work actually comes from a peer network of these things that we call integrated data systems. And there are around 40 of them in the United States, the way we count them. They all look quite different, but also seeing something that is, there are, you know, common categories of this work. So we are here to talk to you about the learnings we've had for our network and then learning alongside hundreds of people in this space. All right, next slide. So the other thing I want to point out here is that everyone has a different definition of racial equity. Here is a definition that we use. So we are talking here about a process. So it's not something that's ever done, and it is around outcomes. So those are two key pieces of the way that we think about this work. We also think about this work functioning at three different levels. So you really can't talk about any equity work without talking about work at the individual level, work at the middle level, and work at kind of the macro level. All right. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Isabel. And apologies, Isabel. I realize I just ran through a few of your slides.
I will
Sorry.
survive it. I want to say I see some of you are saying the slides are not changing. I see some of you are saying that they are, so I don't entirely know how to fix it on that end. But if you're having issues, please let me know. Um, or somebody else who can be better at it than me. But I do want to acknowledge that this is hard work to do in this particular moment. I know the United States, we're in a particular moment that we can acknowledge, but even internationally, we know the democratic backsliding is happening. We know the rise of right-wing and nationalist movements, as well as other sorts of racism and homophobia, genderphobia, things like that are happening. And so I can't say it as well as Tema Okun does, but that we are dedicated to the work of racial justice, democracy, and mutual well-being. And we know that it comes from solidarity, and we yearn for a world centered on mutual care and concern. So just to name that this is hard during this time, but we're still working for it. And so what all that really comes down to is that we made this toolkit, which I've heard that a lot of you already use, and if you don't, welcome. This is a really great opportunity to learn more about it. Um, this is the second iteration, our 2025 version of the toolkit. It contains positive and problematic practices across the data lifecycle, which I will explain in a minute. And it comes with a companion workbook that has activities for getting you and your team started. I also want to say that we have these things called works in action. A work in action is similar to an exemplar, right? It's kind of like the people who are doing this the best that we know right now, but we also want to use a term grounded in the humility that these people bring to their work. They don't necessarily feel like they're doing everything right either, and so we want to acknowledge all of the hard work they're doing and all of the work that we all still have to do. And we frame this around the data life cycle. So as you're thinking, and you can drop it in the chat if you want to, but just what resonates with you, what part of the life cycle do you work with? And we also want to say that these aren't mutually exclusive things, right? There are definitely things that fall into many different categories, but as a framing tactic, we like to think that sort of goes from planning to collection to access to use of algorithms and AI to data analysis to reporting and then back again, right? This is a cycle and data works that way. And so finally, our central metaphor really for this toolkit is that much like the large infrastructure projects of the 19th century being railroads and the 20th century being highways, data infrastructure is the big infrastructure project of our generation, of our century. And as highways and railroads were able to both decimate and develop communities, data infrastructure can do the same thing. So this is really dedicated to the idea that we can co-create data infrastructure to promote racial equity in the public good, instead of investing in infrastructure that just keeps things as they are and leaving things in the sort of disparate and stratified way that they are right now. So this is what the process was like. This is nearly a decade's worth of work. It was a participatory action research project, and there were over 100 people involved in the making of our most recent update. So we just want to say this is the expertise of a lot of people over a lot of time. And it takes a while to make something sort of this big and comprehensive. And finally, in the 2025 toolkit, we had 110 contributors, including 73 unique work in action authors. We had 54 works in action, including 7 long-form case studies on participatory governance. There were 86 hours and 15 minutes of meetings. This is a gross undercount, but that is over 3.5 full days of time that we spent on this, and 743 work in action emails. This is definitely an undercount, but I just want to give you a sense of what Amy and I were doing for the past year, which is just an excessive amount of collecting information. And what did that lead to? This is what I call my mind palace. But this is the toolkit. This is what it is. As you can see, we have that data lifecycle, which is really the sort of meat and potatoes of our work here. But we also acknowledged when we worked with the initial work group that a lot of people were like, people might not be ready. Organizations might not be ready to bring community into their processes. And it's not always the right decision, right? We don't want to be destroying trust by bringing in opinions that we're not ready to hear, or that we're not ready to work with. And so we have this Foundations for Community Involvement section, which has work in action examples, it has resources, and then you get into the data lifecycle, which has, again, positive and problematic practices for each phase of the life cycle, as well as works in action and resources. And then you'll see in some sections, we have some sort of like special little call out boxes or different subcategories, but generally, this is the toolkit. This is everything that's in there. And really, at the end of the day, racial equity is all about sharing power. We want to share power with people who have had it historically taken away, and this is just the building blocks of trying to get to it. And again, whoever you want to share power with, who it's been taken away from, if racial equity isn't your lens, sharing power is really about whatever marginalized community and whatever communities you're really working with. So if that's a more helpful framework, it's available. And what's different about the toolkit? I've mentioned a couple of these already, but there is an interactive website. This is very exciting. Some people love a straight PDF. Amy loves a straight PDF, but there are also people who might want to click through at a different pace, engage with things that seem more interesting to them, and sort of leave things behind that are not necessarily relevant to them. This gives you the opportunity to do that in a bit of a more interactive way. We have the companion workbook, as I mentioned. It is a Google slide. It is accessible, free to everybody, and you can make your own copy and do with it as you wish, which is super exciting. Foundations for Community Engagement, I mentioned. We also included tribal data sovereignty in this version of the toolkit. That was one of those things that when the 2020 toolkit was published, they were like, oh, I cannot believe we missed that. A lot of the same principles apply, but we wanted to acknowledge that there are special rights that tribes in the United States are entitled to, as well as First Nations people in Canada, and however those sort of interactions work. And then finally, we changed our algorithms and statistical tools section to algorithms and artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of change and development in this area. While we are not technologists and we are not vendors, we're not here to tell you how to use AI or what to do with it. We do want to support the notion that it is there, it is available, and that there should be governance and disclosure, and there should be rules around the ways in which we use it and what it can be used to do. And we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that as it has been democratized in such a huge way. So, all that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy, and we're going to talk about evaluating risks and benefits.
Okay, so I'm going to give you, so we've given you this toolkit. It is not like leisure reading, but it is meant to be accessed a lot of different ways. Now we're going to present another common tool that we use in our work, which is also covered in the toolkit. So this is one practical thing that you can use. We use it a lot, and we encourage you to do the same. So whenever we are thinking about an example of data access or use, we like to think about 4 questions. So in our context, in the US especially, legality is incredibly important. So baseline, like the floor is this legal, right? Second is it ethical? Is it a good idea? And then how do you know and who decides? Spoiler alert, that's data governance. We're going to talk more about that. All right, so next slide. So quick thing about legality, there are a lot of different ways to prove legal authority or to establish legal authority. So we have here listed some common ones in the US. They're very similar for you all in Canada. And we also think really carefully about types of data classification. So thinking about data that is open, so data that can be used without any restrictions, data that can be used under specific circumstances, we call that protected data, and then data that is just unavailable. This could be data that is legally unavailable. It could be data that have been, a server has been, fried, that is unavailable, or it should be data that is just really dirty and shouldn't be used, also unavailable. There are times as well that data is unavailable because it is politically not feasible to use it. Um, all part of the same category in our mind. So the next category is it ethical? The tricky thing about ethics, as we all know, is that we all have different ethics, right? We hope that we have some foundational ethical underpinnings, but it is different. So the trick about this one is you can't really talk ethics unless you're having people talking about things. So this is an example here. This matrix you see is a matrix that where we talked through with our first work group back in 2018 and 2019 about different examples of use cases, and this is where they plotted them. So that is ethics. Next one, is this a good idea? This is we are all applied researchers at AISP, very practical in what we do. I love theory, but that's not what we do. So this is the most important question in my opinion. It's just, is this a good idea, right? Like, should this analysis be done? Can you really answer the question, or can you respond to what you find out? Or has this analysis already been done 100 times, right? What are you really contributing here? So this is a really important one that we often think is ignored or skipped completely. And then the last one is how do we know and who decides? A really important piece of this is collaborative decision making. Again, if you're not having conversations about data and access and use, you are not having data governance. Data governance involves people, policies, and procedures that govern how data are used. And you have to do that in conversation and in relationship. So at this point, we're going to use this tool to consider risk and benefit. So as the colors indicate, green is like you're good, right? There is high benefit, low risk. Red is like stop, caution. There is high risk, low benefit. And then the yellow orange color is kind of is in the middle. And I am sorry, I'm realizing that usually sometimes we have A, B, C, D here for anyone who is having trouble with colors on this screen. Apologies for that. All right, the next slide is, I'm not going to read this to you, um, but for you later, if you look at the slides. Benefits, risk, we're going to just talk through this rather. Legal risk, again, not going to read to you. These are available for you later. The main one here is misuse, right? That could be accidental or purposeful misuse, risk of unauthorized disclosure, and then enforcement. Like, should these data be used for some kind of enforcement? We often say in our work, that you really want to be careful about using data for punitive reasons, and only do that in certain cases. So legal risk and then ethical risk are very tricky, right? Because what is an ethical risk for me as a middle-aged white female coming from a lot of privilege is going to be very different. My vantage point and perspective of ethical risk. So it is very important when considering ethical risks to consider a wide variety of perspectives and to make sure you have a diversity of perspectives and vantage points around the room. Okay, so at this point, we are going to transition into an activity. So we are going to use WooClap again. Actually, sorry, I also realized I have a citation if anyone wants to read more about the 4 questions. I just dropped a link to a journal. Okay, so we are now going to transition to an example, and I'm going to turn it over to Isabel. I think, Isabel, are you leading the first one? Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Perfect.
So this is the framework again. We do have those numbers there, so you can think of 1 as kind of that green section. 2 and 3 are a little more murky, and then 4 is probably like let's take a step back and think about it. If you are on the WooClap or you join the WooClap, you should see a matrix like this in front of you. And here is our first example. I wanted to find a Canadian health example. So I went to Ontario health profiles, and found this example of open data on teen fertility in Toronto. Um, so before I dive in and tell you all of my thoughts on it, and certainly I know some of Amy's thoughts on it. I just want to show what popped up when I looked at teen fertility. I got a definition of teen fertility. I got the trend over time and comparison rates. I got some sociodemographic characteristics here with a fun little chart. There was a quality score. You might not be able to see it so well, but it gives you what goes into that score, as well as how fresh it is and the metadata. And yes, there is the website link at the bottom of the slide. When you have these slides, you can click on it yourself. So you can either in the Woo Clap or in the chat give us a 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you think about this being open data? Should it be open? How do we feel about it? Give you another second to look at the slide, then I'll click over and see sort of where we've ended up on the chart. Wow, I'm seeing a very good mix here. This is exciting. This will be a good conversation, or chat conversation. Um, okay, so I'm seeing some greens, some number ones, some like high risk, low benefit. Um, Seeing a lot of people kind of hanging around in this orange area, like high benefit, high risk. Um, yes, thank you guys for you guys are really great at these Zoom annotations. This is so fun. Does anyone want to put in the chat sort of why they said what they said?
Yeah, and I just want to say out loud too, this is such a good example of why data governance involves conversations because clearly everyone has a different perspective here, right? These are pretty different answers. Yeah. And Merrick, to your point, what do we mean by risk? Risk for whom, right? So when we think about risk, we often think about privacy risk. We think about stigmatization risk. We think about legal risk. If you click into the slides, the slides I did not read to you, that has some laundry lists of risks. There are many. And we also detail this quite a bit in the toolkit. Yeah, racial profiling is certainly a risk. Stigmatization of communities, especially because a lot of open data is geocoded, is a very common one. Um, yeah, great. Yeah, these are all great questions.
Yeah. No, these are really great questions. And I do want to say that I appreciate the like circumspect nature at which you've come at this. It's so funny because I'm very used to the US context and I was looking at this and I was like, wow, the metadata is amazing. I'm like, look at how much context they're providing. And so I was like, wow, no one's gonna have an issue with this. And like that shows my bias, right? Like that shows the way in which I'm so used to having no context around what any of these things mean when we have open data even like looking at New York open data, it does not give you this level of information around a certain issue, right? Whereas, right, were the teens involved? What does that mean? Is there territorial stigmatization, right? Can there be racial profiling, right? Income is often a proxy for race. What does that mean? And how does that pop up, right? And does everybody need access to this data, right? What is the benefit of people having this data openly? Is another good question to ask.
Yeah, great questions. All right, let's jump to another example. So we're going to clear out the woo clap. And this next example is an example from my community. So I work for the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Pennsylvania, obviously, but I live in North Carolina. And the reason for that is because I used to be the director of the integrated data system in my community, which is how I ended up working at Penn. And I kind of refused to move, is the short story there. So a lot of my data examples are examples from my own community because I'm very familiar with the data there. Um, so HIV status by zip code. I will also note that these data are no longer available. So if these, a lot of, we have a real issue right now in the US of data sources being taken down from public domain for lots of different reasons, some good, some not good. in my opinion. But I'm not even sure if this data, I forgot to double check this week, if it's publicly available. Um, but there it is. So think about in the Woo clap where you would put this. So risk versus benefit. So think about the benefits here. If you want to drop in, let's start with the benefits first. So what are the benefits of this type of data visualization? I'm sure that there are some epidemiologists in the room, public health folks. Yeah, exactly. Celeste, I hope I'm saying your name right. Targeted interventions, right? You have to know where to put supports for any kind of health problem. So, yeah, another question in the chat, Charity. To your point, these are all open data. So these examples, we're going to go into protected data next. These are all open data. So everything you're seeing here is on a public dashboard. It is public facing, no credentials needed. This is what you see. Um, so not sure who's using it, right? That's the challenge with open data. You aren't sure who is using it and for what purpose. Okay. So proximity supports to understand social determinants of health. Exactly. All right. Now I'm going to add an overlay to this map and see if that changes. So again, this is my community. Um, this is a map of race in my community. So you see the darker colors is actually white in this map, and the lighter colors are communities of color in our context. So in my community, they call this the crescent of poverty, wedge of wealth. So we have very racialized housing segregation in our community, and there's certain patterns that are certain parts of town that are very mostly Black residents, and then we have areas that are highly segregated white, and then some areas that are quite diverse. So, does this change your opinion of HIV status by zip code? So, just to marinate on that, for data that is highly racialized, does this change your risk versus benefit? Yeah. Yeah, and in the chat, there's agreed. There's definitely some stigmatization risk. For anyone who lives in my community, is it a shock that that these data look the way there is? No, but there's certainly stigmatization risk. Um, Great. Okay. And if people aren't in the chat, I would encourage you just to dip in there for a minute. There's quite some interesting expertise in the room. So thank you for sharing your expertise, everyone. All right, let's do another one real quick. This is one that is, again, this is my community. So this is actually my neighborhood that you see right here. And this is data that is public right this moment. So I'm sure all of you are watching the news and seeing about the ICE enforcement, the immigration enforcement that's happening. We have been a hotbed of that in my community because we have a very high immigrant population, especially Latino immigrants, Spanish speaking. So this little sliver right here is my exact neighborhood. So you can see it's actually quite a small geography in East Charlotte. So what do you think about this data being publicly available right now? So this is data that shows what language is spoken at home. So think about risk versus benefit here at this moment of time in 2025. Yeah, I think this is very clear to the folks on this call, but just to point out that data is contextual, right? So what wasn't risky 2 years ago can then become very, very risky. So don't want to, beat this one too much, but just trying to make the point, open data isn't stagnant, right? Like we have to sometimes take things down and acknowledge when things are risky, and sometimes risk increases, sometimes it decreases. So, all right. With that, I am going to, we're going to shift. I think we have just enough time, Isabel. I can do the data governance really quick. Let's try to do maybe the example 5. I think we have time for that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Let me switch over in case people want to use the Woo clap, but I think we've been having a great conversation in the chat,
We're
so feel
probably.
free to do that instead. So example number 5 is tracking COVID positivity. So again, these are restricted data. So unlike the data we showed before, this is not publicly accessible at the individual level. But in Indiana, during the sort of early days and the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, so if we're thinking sort of March, April 2020, they integrated individual tax records and DMV records to get a full population count, or as close to a full population count as they could, of the state of Indiana. And they actually used that information to send out a bunch of sample tests. So instead of just having positivity and hospitalization rates, right, which generally come from symptomatic or contact tracing, symptomatic examples of COVID and contact tracing, they tested a representative sample of people to get an understanding of how many positive test rates. Um, but again, this was integrating a lot of individual row level data. So, what do we think? Are there, what are some of the risks involved in that? What are some of the potential benefits? Do we think that this was an okay use of taxpayer and DMV data that, again, there's very little consent involved in the way that that information is collected? I think we should think about that as well. See, some people are popping in here. They're health people, so you might have thoughts. Yeah, I'm seeing high risk. Uh,
Yeah, and lots of green as well. I mean, I think this is a great example of we really needed that data at the time. Yeah, yeah. And just to say out loud, like these are all examples that have benefit, right? And they have risk. So all data access and use involves risk and benefit. And so the purpose of this activity isn't to, try to throw stones into different data sources and data projects, but it's more just to acknowledge that there's risk and benefit to everything, and we just have to carefully just discern it and do that regularly. Can't be a one-time thing and done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing some great responses in the chat about the high risks and the benefits of this. I will say that again, this was used to create what they call the denominator for all statistics that came out about the pandemic, contact tracing, and such. And for vaccine rollout was incredibly effective. So in the moment, this was probably a very high benefit, despite the risk thing to do. And we were in a particular moment, right? But we should also consider, right? Consent does add another layer to that. And what does that mean? So thank you all for the really interesting conversation. I'll pass it back to Amy to talk
All
about
right.
governance stuff.
Yeah, so my favorite topic. So the whole point of data governance from our vantage point, because again, we're not technologists, we said that already, is really to think about how can you increase benefit and mitigate risk. And as we've kind of come through today in our discussion is like there's no magic answer here, right? There's no right answer and there's no real wrong answer. It's all about discernment in collaboration with other people. So that's the tricky part, right? This is a very time intensive process as evidence that we still have lots of slides that we're never going to get to, but we've shared so you can still use them. All right. So with that, we'll keep on rolling. So data governance really we see as the foundation for all of our work. And to be clear, next slide. When we talk about data governance, we are talking about, for those of you in the room who are familiar with the big blue book of knowledge, we are talking about that. Like we know a lot about that. We read the book, but we're talking about people having conversation. So um, we think a lot about these pieces and how they work together. This is a graphic that we write a lot about. It's called our quality framework. So we think about integrated data systems as really needing these 5 things that are foundational. You can't really be an integrated data system in our network without having evidence of these 5 things. So governance being the first, very purposefully. If you don't have governance, you do not have an integrated data system in our, from our vantage point. And the purpose of data governance is collaboration. And if you do it well, it will inherently drive equity. Um, that's that's the reason it exists, right? Is to make better decision making, to reduce negative impact for certain groups, and to improve equitable outcomes for all. So, I'm going to skip all of these and go, will you click down to suggestion one? So if for those of you who are new to the data governance world, this is what we encourage everyone to start with, right? So suggestion number one for thinking about data governance is look around. There's probably someone doing really great data governance work in your organization or in your community. Don't recreate the wheel, like go ahead and build upon what they're doing. People will share your work. If you need a place to start, we have lots of documents on our website, and happy to share with you always. Suggestion number two is to think really carefully about the interest holders and to set your table carefully. So not everyone should be a part of data governance because not everyone is going to have something to offer here fully. But you want to be really careful about the balance. So you want to have people that have direct experience in the data that you're using. You want to have people who are data stewards, who have expertise in the data. You want to have people who can make decisions and allocate resources. But so it's but you also don't want a table that's unwieldy, right? So it's a very careful process of figuring out who should be a part of decision making around data. So the next couple slides are available for you on your own, to use if helpful. And here's our suggestion number three. We talk about this a lot in the toolkit. Is, for any part of data governance, the goal should be participatory processes. So if you're starting from nothing, then just get people around a table regularly and talk about it. Once you do that, really think about where you can go from next. So our suggestion three, and this is really our guidance for everything, is like get on the spectrum of engagement, to ownership and move right. So start where you start, and that's fine. Wherever you're starting is fine, and work to improve and refine. There's always work to be done around improving data governance. All right, Isabel, you want to bring us home?
Sure, yeah. I mean, really, at the end of the day, back to our sort of life cycle here, right? Where do we need to center racial equity in the data life cycle? Everywhere. No matter who you are, where you are, and what your work is, there is something that you can do today to start centering racial equity. Again, this is like a massive document, especially if you go across sort of all three parts of our centering equity suite. But you don't have to do all of it right away, but any sort of step in that process is a good step and is the right step to be taking. So if you can eliminate a problematic practice or if you can add a positive practice, that is really great and important work. And we thank you for it.